Thank you so much for tuning in to this pretty special conversation that I just had with John Vervaeke. It's kind of it emerged spontaneously, and it's very much connected to something that we will officially announce here shortly, as soon as we get the dates down. But John Vervaeke and I, through the Circling Institute, will be leading a course together. And it will be a course that in some capacity integrates circling and deep philosophical dialogue, or dialogos. Right? Most likely it'll be a weekend, and it'll be in July, some weekend in July. So we'll let you know when that's coming. It'll be through the Circling Institute, so it'll give you an opportunity to dive in and in a very experiential dive into exactly what we're talking about in this video. And so we had some technical difficulties on this, and I just tried to edit as much of it out as possible, so hopefully it doesn't come across as too clunky. But essentially, we were diving into this notion that Mr. Vervaeke has been bringing up, or brought up, about listening to reason. In the capacity, not in the instrumental reason sense, but in the way in which reason is something innate to us and revealing of the ground of the good as such. And so it was a deep dive into that conversation. Of course, that ended up culminating into essentially talking about fellowship and friendship, and these ways that the two are so mutually indwelled and dwell into and indwelled by each other. So I enjoy the dialogue. Stay tuned. I'll be giving out announcements, everywhere I can about the course that's coming up, and enjoy.
I have to agree. So coming, like I said, in response to this amazing book by Schindler that I'm reading with Dan Chiappi, the question that's forming in my mind in response to his analysis about the truncation and trivialization, the technologization of reason, as an integral part of the meaning crisis. What does it mean? What would it mean to recover reasoning as something intrinsically valuable? And so the question that I want to explore is, what does it mean to listen to the voice of reason as the logos? Right? What does it mean? Because there I'm hearkening back to the quote from Heraclitus: "Don't listen to me, but listen to the logos." Right? And it is wise to acknowledge that all things are one. You have another translation, but that you get the core idea, right?
Totally.
And so, and I mean, on one side, we've been exploring all of this, right, in terms of dialogos and the listening. But more importantly, I want to now try and explicate what he's on about, which is the interrelationships between dialogos and the being able to listen to the voice of reason, so that we come to appreciate reason for its own sake. Which is very, very different than rationalism, right? That's the point he keeps trying to make. And so I've been trying to understand, and as I was saying, I'm trying to understand that. I'm trying to be helped to understand that by the analogy that you and I have pursued about Roussin's idea about the musicality of being, and that we can. There's been a similar degradation in our listening of music. We used to listen to music for its own sake because it humanized us, if you'll allow me to have a clunky verb in there, right? That it was a place within which the good. So Plato has this idea that the best lens for the good is the good life, right? That's the whole project in the Republic. What we'll do is we'll what's a good life, both of individuals and a community, and only when we see what a good life, that's the lens through which we can understand the goodness of being. And so the ability to listen to that goodness is supposed to be inherently valuable to us. It's supposed to be integral to a good life. And then the idea is, but that requires a relating and a getting into a right relationship with reason, and reasoning as an enactment of the logos, that you're valuing it for its own sake. You're valuing the relationship rather than I reason because I want control over nature, or I want to manipulate or persuade people, or I want to win a political position, or I want to get to the bottom line, or I don't care about reason. I want to know what are the applications, what are the practical implications, like that voice that's really like powerful these days. And the point he makes is all of those sort of diminishments of reason, and also I think it's convergent with my argument of how we have truncated reason into mere logicality. All of those things are significantly contributing to the meaning crisis, because if we are not capable, his thesis is, if we're not capable of listening to the voice of reason, we are incapable of escaping. We're fundamentally, deeply incapable of escaping our egocentric bias.
You said fundamentally escaping the intrinsic sense of bias, right?
Yes. So this goes to a thesis I've made before, right? That what the deepest commitment in reason is the commitment to the realization of self-deception, and that what that does, right, is requires self-correction. And every genuine act of self-correction is ecstatic. It requires some self-transcendence in order to self-correct, right? And so the idea is, if we don't have the good as an aspirational goal in our acts of reasoning, we will not be able to appreciate the need for self-transcendence. And therefore, we will not be able to deeply appreciate the need for self-deception. So we might be able to manage some superficial self-deceptions, but we'll be able to do it ultimately in the service of a kind of narcissism and more pervasive self-deception.
Right. And what he's highlighting in that book, what's been lost about Plato and reading Plato, which is what seems to come through all the dialogues in multiple forms, is this. I think what I heard is that Plato was in a certain sense arguing for not a reason in the instrumental sense, but that reason is what humans do because there is the good. Is that it's like there's the implicit way, and there's the implicit sense in which human beings, it's that's what I heard you say, right? That it's like it's the nature of human beings to reason, right? And it shows in some level the native ground that we have for the good, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The idea is that, and Plato's great argument, to my mind, is the interconnecting of these things. We have these two great, I don't know what to call them, these two great meta drives. They're constitutive of our human personhood, our human agency.
In person, somebody told me that person in some deep etymological sense means.
I was just saying that human beings have this, these two deep constitutive things that are constitutive of their personhood, even their agency. One is we're trying to remove inner conflict, and one is we want to be in contact with what's real, and we find those good in and of themselves. They're not morally good, aesthetically good, or even epistemically good. They're just good, right? They're part of the sinews of a good life as a good person,
right?
And
well, I'm just thinking about this. I just keep, as you're talking about this, I keep just flashing to, I mean, one of the big, like the essentially what circling is so much about has to do with listening, right? And in the stage in the second stage of circling, right? First one is sovereignty. The second one is explore, and explore is about the subtitle of that is the, or in parentheses, is the art of getting someone's world. And
Yes.
and one is, there's the art of getting someone's world, right? Because
Yes.
it's not technical per se.
No.
However, it's like, I keep flashing to that sense in which, yeah, when you really listen to somebody, and you really listen in a penetrating way, right? In a way that's like not just what they're saying, the arguments, or in the stuff that they're talking about, but who's saying it. And the way you start to hear is, what people start to hear is, they start to hear a care, it seems to me. It's all like, it's like you start to hear like, what, who is this being that's like cares so much to be baffled by the thing that they're addressing, right? Like, what's the,
Yes.
and
Yes.
you can start to hear, and I think what you start to hear is this, something like, it's hard to put into words. I mean, it's, you start to hear goodness, right? It's almost
Yes.
like you start to hear goodness itself, like, oh, you're good, right? It's like, it sounds kind of trite, but like at that level of hearing somebody being deeply seen in that way, I think what you see is this fundamental good, and it's like it shines, and everybody, and
Yeah.
you can just, it's so many experiences of people kind of having this experience of like, they start talking about some problem that they're having with themselves, some shame that they're having, or some problem that they're, and they go backwards and backwards, and you start to open it up, and then you just see something that transcends and includes all of that, right? Is somebody's trying to grapple with something, but that they care, is it this relationship to goodness, and it's almost like you can feel the goodness itself emanating as their being, or something like that. So I keep flashing to what you're saying, and when I hear him like bring up the intrinsic nature of reason, right?
I think that's right. I think that's an excellent connection. That's really good. And what's interesting about that is, so like, and you do this better than I do, but like when you're getting somebody's world, right? Yeah, you're getting, the sensibility transcendence that Wright talks about. You're getting, you have to go through this kind of ability to re-see things to really get that other person's world, because the temptation is just to see their world as a version of your world, right? That's the temptation, right? And then the point is, so, and then Wright talks about that, he uses Murdoch's example of the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. I've talked about that before, but the idea is, no, I'm doing this thing, and the verb that comes to my mind is, I'm tailoring my sensibility to you, so that, right, what is I don't like these words because they drip with romanticism, but what's unique about how you care about the world, like I'm really trying to get that. But so there's kind of this, your suchness, if you'll allow that language, right? The way that there's a particular doorway to reality, a network of intelligibility that only you have woven, and I'm trying to see what that weaving is. But I'm also hearing something that is common, so that we can have a common unity, a community, which is you underneath it are trying to get inner peace and be in touch with the world through your caring. You're taking care of yourself and you're caring about the world, and those are fundamentally bound together. And you and I share that. We have a shared commitment to that, insofar as we are committed to a good life as good people.
Right.
I don't know how much of that you heard, Guy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was gorgeous. Yeah, I heard all of it. Can you hear me? Yeah, you're coming through on this end just fine.
Yeah.
In fact, I really heard that sense of when you said in touchness.
Yeah.
Right. That.
Yes.
And that is that there's this warmth I notice, no matter how trippy and abstract the stuff that we talk about in dialogos gets, what grows and grounds is often this experience of unbearable affinity, right? Like,
That's just it. The two are there inseparably together. So
yeah,
I'm doing some Lectio Divina on Spinoza, and I'm reading this passage where he says, God does not have abstract ideas.
yeah,
And I was like, what? And what he means is, like, we have to go to this abstraction to get to that level.
yeah,
But that level is also in the most intimate
yeah,
connections we have. We
yeah,
we set these two as as
right,
somehow opposites to each other or distant from each other.
yeah,
But the move is that they're distant and then they come back together.
yeah,
And so like that's exactly it. So when I'm listening to reason, and this is the question that like I'm trying to explore with you. There's a way in which when I'm listening to reason, I'm listening to what is common, not only common to us as people, but ultimately what's common to us and being, right? Because we commune with it. So I'm doing that, but I'm also listening to you. And like I said, your own, the way in which you are a particular perspectival and participatory portal
yeah,
into
yeah,
the being can express itself. And those two have to be held together.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
the question that's coming through for me is they're not identical in any logical or categorical sense, but there's this
yeah,
like I'm trying to get, because there's an irony in Heraclitus's statement,
yeah,
right? Because if we took him literally, we would stop reading the text and then we wouldn't get the rest of his text,
right.
and we wouldn't get the instruction to pass beyond the text to the
Oops. I'm sorry, John. It's kind of a bumpy ride.
that's okay.
We got you right back to the to get beyond to the logos. The logos.
Yeah. Well, that's a good play. I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean, what I was pointing to is the irony in Heraclitus's text, right? There's
Yeah.
a deep irony there because we
Yeah.
have to listen to him, right,
Yeah.
to actually get his recommendation, to listen
Yeah.
beyond him, right, to the logos. And
Yeah.
there's that. It's almost like a Kierkegaardian irony or a Socratic irony.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get what's the relation, and I don't mean cynical irony in the way irony is used now. I'm more, and that's why I don't even want to use the term because people are going to mishear it. But there's this sense about I have to both. I have to listen to, in order to listen to reason, I have to get good at listening to something other than my own monologue.
Yeah.
That's the primary thing.
Yeah.
But right. So that means being able to really listen to others, which of course is the point of circling.
Yeah.
But I need to also be able, but myself and the others, we need to be able, insofar as we're hearing each other, we need to be able to hear something
Yeah.
that is common to us and beyond us. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm stumbling here, but like listening to reason is about fundamentally getting into, getting into right relationship with reality.
Yeah.
And caring to do that Sorry, I'm struggling, but I'm
this is great. And I appreciate the struggle because it's like you're highlighting something that's there. It's not totally revealed though, but it's present. It's present is concealed, right? And so we're addressing it. I think that right there, it seems to me like this is a moment where we're listening to something, right?
Yes.
It's like there's something about like where you sense, it's almost like you sense a unity. You sense that there's something making this intelligent that's unaccounted for, right?
Yes.
And you hear it first. And this is why I was going to ask you, what is it? Why does it make more sense, if it does, right? If I put it like this, to say listen to reason and not see reason.
Yeah.
Right. There's something intelligible there. I'm wondering about what's the.
No, I think that's good. And I think, and part of that has to do with, there's so much here, right? Because I mean, he's also, Schindler's also acknowledging that the point of the dialogues is, right, and he's trying to get this actually dialogical thing between these two traditions. We have the older tradition that the point of the dialogues are the propositional arguments, and then we have the newer arguments from Hyland and Gonzalez as others. The point, Irape, is the non-propositional knowing. And then what Schindler says is, no, they're both right. And it's about actually the dialogue between the propositional and the non-propositional, and getting that. And the idea is, if I get that into right relationship, I will be able to get into right relationship with reason, or maybe better, I will embody the right relationship that is reason to reality. That's so. I think when we're saying listening, and again, this is back to the irony I was just talking about. We use that because we know there is some deep connection, and this is one of the meanings of logos. There's deep connection to speech. There's deep connection to speech, right? And communication. But it's not. But the listening, right, is trying to remind us to that which is outside the speaking in speech.
In fact, draws is because there is no listening. There is no speech without listening. That's the blind spot, I think, in linguistics a lot, is that there's and communication, anything. Self-help is like, usually I think about communication, they talk about, well, what you say. But no, there is no, like, speech would not make any sense unless it was already in a response to something, addressing it, calling it forth, right?
Yes, and so that's what I mean when I want to challenge the monological model of reason. That reason is to produce a monologue, right? That reasoning is, if reasoning is about caring and being responsive and responsible, right? Responsive and responsible to reality, then it has to be inherently dialogical. And so I think why we involve listening rather than seeing is precisely because we are taking this ironic attitude towards language, because we're trying to point to the inherently dialogical nature of the relationship. Right.
Because there is that, there really is that quality of, so bringing that back into just the experience of talking with people, right? And when you really like someone, right? In this experience of, in what you're talking about, bringing these two together, right? The suchness and the moreness, right? The idea and the object, right? The inside, the outside, the speakable, the ineffable, this kind of paradox that when you really look at things, you kind of can have this incredible relationship with, that seems to be really, really opening. Is that I notice that with this experience of the universal, when I was talking about before, of like getting someone's world, or the experience of being gotten, and this experience of feeling like you're encountering goodness itself, right? But here's the thing about it, is that it's never, but it's also simultaneously with getting the particularity of how fucking peculiar that human being is. There is a way, totally. Right? It's like the particular way you're broken, right? And the way that you respond to that, and you've overcome that, and you've weaved that together, this weaving that's like so peculiar. Like there's no one like you everywhere else in the world. Is that experience is like almost, it's like shining forth between something universal, like.
But that's exactly it. So I mean, the dialogue, the dialogos, actually exemplifies the inherently dialogical nature of participation, right? So the good, I mean, and this is why you have this whole metaphysics about emanation and emergence and their interpenetration, and that's valuable and important. But what they're trying to get at, right? Look, horizontally, we unfold something in a drama in dialogue. It's narrative, and narrative is our primary initial experience with non-logical identity. I'm going to become identical to somebody other than I am right now through you, right? That's what a narrative is, the way in which we have become, we acclimatize ourselves, and we accustom, and pay very careful attention to those words, ourselves to non-logical identity. But what we forget, what our culture has forgotten, is that horizontal narrative, and that's the drama within dialogos, which is it's essential. It's not the only form of non-logical identity. The other form of non-logical identity is participation. The non-logical
Right.
identity between the suchness and the moreness, between the, like, the particular is like the one is a source of determination, which means things become determinate, which means they become self-determining, which means they become different from each other. And in differing from each other, they don't form some sort of homogeneous mass. But that is the proper expression of the principle of determination. Right? This is Pearl's whole analysis. There's a there's a non-logical identity that goes this way. The non-logical identity of participation.
Right.
And that's the thing that Plato's trying to do, right, is he's trying to get the non-logical identity of participation and the non-logical identity, right, of aspiration, integrated together, so that you can see them as having a kind of pedagogical affinity. They affine to each other and they teach and instruct each other. Right. And so when you're listening to reason, you like, the point is, you notice what you did there. You're simultaneously listening to the person, but you're listening to the way in which reality self-realizes. Like they're inseparably bound up together.
Exactly. And what's that? Yes.
Yeah. The nesting of the relevance realization of the person, and the corresponding unfolding of intelligibility. And that this is the thing that Whitehead is really impressing on me, and how much this is also dialogical in nature, inherently dialogical in nature. Same thing with Spinoza, even though Spinoza wrote in a monologue. But the point I'm making is, right, I'm trying to understand reason as this profound kind of responsiveness to the drama of aspiration, and and I don't know, that the self-transcendence, but we self-transcend in both directions. It's not quite right, but the participation and aspiration dimensions, and how they are bound together when we're listening. So could we come to one of Plato's point, and we're sort of just rediscovering it, the primary way in which I can correct for my bias is to really listen to you, to get your world, right? Because you have different biases. Can we take that relationship? Can we cultivate that relationship interpersonally, so that we can take it transpersonally, so that I can see the world as as the bearer of a perspective from which I can correct myself.
Wow. Oh, I'm hearing a couple of things. Like one is, it strikes me that in some sense, where there are these distinctions that we're bringing together, right, that are operating, and that there's something concealed, right, that's not, that we can feel it, we can hear it, right, because it's when you go, that I'm like, this is good. We're right at the thing that kind of calls forth reason in a certain sense, right? It transcends reason. It calls it. It in some way alludes to it's in some sense it's not gotten there yet, but yet it's sensing it. And what's interesting is that we're describing something that people, humans, do, and they engage in, and they find themselves engaging in. So we're talking about a phenomenon, like on one level, like this only would even make sense because we're describing something that shines forth, right? In our intelligibility, right? And so if you kind of feel into what it takes to understand that and explicate that, what you're explicating is not theoretical fundamentally, right? It's non-theoretical, like at its base. It happens, right? And this is where Heidegger, I think, really kind of comes in this way of this kind of sense in which this, from our embedded, right, situations, right, all of this unfolds, right? And this kind of this very grounded sense.
I think that's exactly right. I think that all of us, the degree to which we're not animals, and the degree to which we're aspiring to be people, persons, living good lives, we are called to reason. But, and maybe Heidegger is valuable here too. I mean, when I ask the question how to listen to reason, part of the question, and this is, is Schindler's point, is we also fail to listen to reason. And I'm interested in, given what we said, like, how is it? I mean, I know how to answer that question as a cognitive scientist, as a psychologist. I know how to talk about biases and how they're rooted in relevance realization. I get all that, but I'm trying to get at what makes us turn away from them. I mean, I think this is what I called ontonormativity. The normativity beyond epistemic and moral and aesthetic normativity is ontonormativity, that the really good is simultaneously the really real, and it's really good just because it's the really real, right? And those two are inseparably bound together. And then we get called to it. Yes, and we get called to it, and people have these experiences of the really real and the ontonormativity, and we talk about them as mystical experiences, and that's legitimate. And there's even a mystical dimension, of course, in Socrates and Plato and Plotinus, right? And in Heidegger, Eckhart's Meister Eckhart's all through Heidegger, right? The Wesenheit is from Eckhart, right? And I appreciate that, and what I want, again, another way of saying it is in Plato, and it comes to fruition, and for me in Plotinus, and then later in Spinoza, is the interweaving of the mystical and what is more frequently, not properly, that was a mistake, what is more frequently called the rational, where what's meant by there is argumentation, right? Argumentation. And for me, like, I want to understand how, I know, sorry, I don't want to sound pretentious. I think I understand, I have good reason and good evidence to understand how to get towards the really real in mystical practices, okay? But I have a sense of how to get to them in dialogical, argumentative practices, and I want to understand that. So another way of asking the question, because you can think of the mystical experience as pure listening. That's what it is. It's pure listening. You shut the mouth, you shut the eyes, you just pure listen, right? The pure consciousness event is one pole of that. But I want to understand, because the other thing I see in Plato, and it's right, is that sense of ontonormativity is essential to reason. And I also get this in Augustine too. And it's like, how can we recover? Because what we've fallen away from, we have fallen away from the linking of propositions as a way of linking us to the non-propositional. We have the only non-prop. So here's a proposal that we have fallen away from that, and that what we do is the linking of propositions and the non-propositional is the bottom line, the practical result, the technological implications. That's the non-propositional for which we are doing the linking of the propositions. And so for me, this is a kind of little confusion, right? And so how do we remember? No, that is all ultimately dependent on, parasitic on, a relationship between propositions that carries us to the non-propositional, that is the really real, that is really good just because it's the really real, and it's intrinsically good because it's the really real, and we experience it that way, and we experience it at the foundations of a good life and of being a good person. So it's at the foundations of virtue and life.
Right. And that this way in which ethos, kind of this sense of ethos that these conversations somehow kind of dwell in and deepen and are dwelled by, right?
That's why the question. That's why all the dialogues are about virtue. Virtue is about that, right? That perspectival, participatory transformation.
Would you say a little bit more about virtue? Like that sense of, I mean, virtues are really, people usually think about virtues and they think they know what that is. If you ask them, you think that, it's like, well, they know what that is until you actually ask them. You're like, you really start thinking about virtues are quite trippy.
Well,
right?
because they have an inherently aspirational proleptic structure to them,
Yeah.
which tempts us in two ways. So
Yeah.
let me try this argument on you.
Okay.
Right. So let's take it as if you had no honesty, I can't teach you about honesty.
Right.
Right, because that's the ultimate version of the Minos paradox. Right. If you don't see the value of honesty, I can't teach it to you, because anything I'm going to do requires you being honest with me, right? And admitting your mistakes, for example. So if you're incapable of honesty, I can't teach you honesty.
Totally.
Right. The point and this works for all, right? This is why Plato's knowing is virtue, and the Minos paradox. Yeah. All learning requires the virtues, right? If you don't have them to some degree, but the thing is, you don't completely have them. So there's two temptations. Because you must have them to some degree, you can fall into a common sense intuition. I know what courage is. I know what honesty is. I can feel it. I know what it is. And then, what you'll see in the dialogues is Socrates will basically demolish that and say, that's insufficient. You haven't understood honesty, because you think that this intuitive beginning is sufficient. It's not. And then some people will recognize, oh, I need something beyond. And then what they'll get an authoritative description of what honesty is. The third person technical definition, and they'll say, oh, that's what honesty is, right? And then Socrates will destroy that, because it doesn't represent aspiration. It just represents appropriation. It just represents somebody like owning the proposition and think by that they've acquired the virtue. And his point is no. See, so the two temptations are like you lose the aspirational element of the virtues when you degrade down into either well, I know what it is because I have to have it in me. Of course you do, but that's insufficient. Well, I know what I have to get beyond me, so I've got to go to something third personal. You're right in a sense, but you can't. It's not third personal without you connecting it to the first person, right? And this is why Socrates is on and on in the dialogues. Don't say it if you don't actually live it.
Yeah.
Right? So don't just give me the definition. You got to tell me, right? Right? Do you really believe it? And believing it, well, he doesn't even mean believe it. What he means is, we mistranslate that often. What he means is, are you really committed to that? Are you really committed to that? Tell me where you're committed, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, right, and of course, rationality is a virtue itself. And so we have to have the rudiments in it, or I couldn't teach you. How could I teach you modus ponens? Well, if you see if P then Q, I have to use modus ponens to teach you modus ponens, right?
Yeah.
So, right, you have to have, but are you fully rational? That's ridiculous. So what is it? Well, I could state some, algorithmic ideal out here that you can't ever makes no sense. Oh, just be logical at all times. That's what rationality is, being logical. We have notice how many people we have on YouTube telling us what rationality is. It's like, really? How did you come so easily to that possession of rationality, that definition? I've been studying it deeply, philosophically, cognitive science, cognitive psychologist for 2 decades. And people better than me have been studying it longer. And is there do we know? Well, oh, wow. You think so you see the sophistry of, rationality is just being logical. That's false too. That's false too. That's insufficient. Doesn't mean logic is irrelevant, but it means that just giving into a formal third person definition is not going to get you into what the virtue is, because virtues are inherently aspirational.
Right.
Sorry, that was a long thing, but I was just trying to get an argument that I've been working on.
That's great. This seems to be just at the heart of it, right? Like the whole, just in terms of to listen to reason, right?
Yes.
Like one, you're listening, it puts you right there. Is like to listen to reason is always to listen to someone, right? You got to listen to somebody to listen to reason, I think, right?
Well, I hope you can do it. I hope we can, like what Chris says, I hope we can thou the world. Yeah. Part of what I'm arguing is part of listening to reason is thouing the world in the right way, not anthropomorphically, not projectively, but so that you can actually listen to it.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Is
like
this what
when I
Goethe was getting to with his work on species and trying to grasp the species of plants is kind of in a certain sense is to listen to the the
Goethe?
the
Yeah,
secret of
yeah,
nature, like to hear it in some sense.
yeah. Because
Like
when yeah, so his sense of seeing, really is more. It's transsensual. It's a
right?
seeing, that's a hearing, that's a touching, that's a
Yeah.
listening, right? Yeah, very much.
There's something
And
there with Goethe. I've been like looking at that and wondering about that. What that talk about a peculiar soul. Goethe, man.
but notice what you're doing here.
Yeah.
I just want to pause before we move to Goethe properly, because
Yeah.
notice the question you're asking, right? Notice we've moved outside of the nominalist framework. We're not asking the question about how do my propositions need to be related to each other.
Yeah.
That's an important question. And I
Yeah.
want to be clear, we don't abandon that question, because
Yeah.
like if we're talking about how do I put my propositions together so that they relate to the non-propositional,
Yeah.
that question is essential, but it's not exhaustive, because we're asking two other questions now. We're asking is, what kind of person do I have to be in order to listen to reason? Which is a different question from how do my propositions relate to each other? And then, and this is the question that, Gerson makes, super salient at the heart of ancient epistemology, which is like our epistemology, because we're after nominalism, is how do I relate the propositions together such that what is knowing? Ancient epistemology takes it for granted that there is knowledge, right? And so then it asks this question: what does the world have to be like such that it's intelligible? Which is a different question.
What does the world have to be like such that it's
intelligible,
right?
Which is the central question of the Platonic thing. And notice what's happening now. Now, the central issue for us is wisdom. The central issue is, what kind of person do I have to be? What kind of virtues do I have to be such that I can undergo the transformations such that I can come into right relationship with the way the world must be in order for it to be intelligible.
Right. You say the last part again. So I was just
I'm
like, what does the world have to be such as intelligent? I was like, whoa. Okay. And then the second thing that you said? Yes.
Yeah. So it's the two sides together we were talking about. Like, so what kind of person do I have to be? Not what kind of formal relationship to my propositions. Right. Again, I'm not excluding that. I am not excluding that. But I'm trying to open up our frame. We have to ask, what kind of virtues must I possess in order so that I can enter into the right relationship with reality? And what does that mean? Is trying to come to a profound understanding of what must the world be like in order for it to be intelligible. See, that's listening. Instead of speaking at the world like the Romantics, right? And saying, this is the way it is, I'm posing, I'm expressing. It's that the world is intelligible to me, and my ability to respond to it presupposes that. Where I have to get the world of the world. What must the world be like? What must the world be coming from in order for it to be intelligible to me?
Yes. And then there's the question, and then in some sense we ask the question, I automatically go right back into what is this which is asking it, right? In what way is that part of the world? And then we start to go, it's very wide and specified, impersonal, personal. We're just right there. This is, I think, this right here is my understanding of your work. This is I think we're right here. If I understand your work correctly, this conformity, right?
Yes.
Is where you're pointing to it and you're saying, this is your response to nihilism. This is in some sense, your answer to nihilism. This is what we're pointing to right here, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So what I want to know is in some way that's analogous to the transformations in attention that bring about the mystical conformity to the really real that is inherently good.
Yeah.
It's an act of falling in love with being.
Yeah.
What is the process by which I link propositions together such that I also enter into a conformity with the real, a transformative process that brings me into conformity with the really real that is inherently good just because it's the really real?
Yeah.
That to me is like, that's the question about, and so how the virtues are, how do I learn to transformatively listen so I can be, I can be conformed to the really real?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's going to be both. I'm going to be listening and proposing. That's the propositions. How do I tack, like sailing, between the listening and the proposing?
There's where it could fall astray. There's where it could fall astray. And I think this is your answer. Like, in some sense, it's like, it's precisely because it's so interesting. I'm thinking about there, right? The English there is, right?
Yeah.
Of this sense in which it's like Heidegger talks about it as Schacken, right? Which roughly translate into shock, but it's that process of being here by stepping back, right? This kind of sense of like the there, right?
Yeah.
Like
yes.
And
yes.
and then the being there is what he would say is the thing that Dasein sustains with its being. This kind of fun, right. It's like this primordial sense in which you get this sense that there's physis, right? But then there's this kind of, in some way, the human being is something like this shock, this stepping back, right? This,
but that's it too, because think about, and this is again what again listening to the voice of reason, because you see it in the Socratic dialogue. You see that shock. That's the aporia, right? And notice that we have these two different senses of realness.
Yeah.
So one is confirmation. This is how things are coming together and homing us, like the walls. We're gathering the walls around us, and the walls are well structured, and they home us. Right? That's confirmation.
Yeah.
But we have the other sense of realness, is when we're taken totally by surprise, and when we're shocked, and we wake up. We have a sense of waking up.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the horror. Like, and so, right. And so, like, the proposing is like we're building these walls, right. And then what we do, and that's homes us, and then we get shocked by some. But the listening is to, well, as you said, is to be vulnerable to the horror, or at least the wonder, the awe that opens it up, and we're doing this, right? We're doing this all the time. And what that reminded me of is, that reminds me of what's called, structural realism in the philosophy of science, where they talk about, you have all these paradigms, in a Kuhnian sense in science. Here's a paradigm, and here's a paradigm, and here's a paradigm. And what people take to be rational is always within a paradigm, right? But Kuhn thought the relationship between the paradigms was non-rational. But people have been arguing in structural realism is, no. Kuhn emphasized what was lost, right, between the paradigms, and he wasn't paying attention to what is being carried through the paradigms, such that there's actually a history rather than a random chaos. And I was thinking, well, that's interesting, because right, we can, right, it's like, right, what we can do is, as we build these little homes of proposition and then shatter them as we open ourselves up again to the world and then rebuild them, right? We can sense in that trajectory what is being carried through all of the different paradigmatic homes we're in. And there's a book, I can't remember the author's name, on Heidegger and transcendence.
Caring
where,
for, right.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that perhaps what Heraclitus is getting on about? Because he's on about, the logos and the tensions. When I'm hearing through all the words, right, I'm hearing through all the particular meanings, and what I'm doing is I'm being carried through them, but I can only be properly carried through them if I do this. Because if I just do this, I'll stay.
Yeah.
And if I just do this, I won't be carried. I'll just flail. But if I do this, I'll be carried through them to find what is underneath all the sayings.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, I was just kind of feeling just how irony somehow is at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? This kind of sense in which, you know, Michelangelo's the biography of Michelangelo is called The Agony and the Ecstasy, and it's like these two things they don't touch, right? And is that agonist or is that ecstatic? There's something about there's something, I get this sense of this exemplifying on some level the awareness that can see things as intelligible, exemplifies an intelligible that's already conformed with the way that the world's intelligible and back and forth. In this way that it pushes out, it's weird. It kind of pushes out this sense of making it a something that like inherently wants to grab it, but yet then it falls apart and then reveals itself through that. This kind of like, is that it? I'm using the word irony. I
think that's fine. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I mentioned that earlier, and there's a Socratic irony, the Kierkegaardian irony.
Yeah.
I think there's also, that self-organizing criticality, right? You build the thing and then it falls apart so that you can rebuild, and it falls. And we're discovering just how pervasive through all the ontological levels self-organizing criticality is. But the thing about it is, you're right, it is just that. Notice what just disclosed itself. We're talking again about all these processes that are going through self-organizing criticality, but what we find is that they're at all these different levels of ontological analysis. So again, the dimensions of participation, and then the dimensions of sort of an aspirational unfolding.
It's so interesting how fractal this is as this conversation is going on. I'm just noticing how many. This is one of the patterns I've noticed in our conversations and in dialogos. Is at some point there seems like there is some mapping that can be had about kind of the stages that often kind of happen in dialogos, and I think we're in one of them right here. Where at some point everything starts to to show itself in everything else, right? It's the reason why Chris in that initial chapter, he wanted to exemplify an archetype of our live conversations, but then he started listening to him, and he's like, it's impossible, because you get this sense in which everything that John's saying, right, was just in everything that Guy just said, which is just in everything. It's just this fractal. And I get this sense where I'm hearing now, getting the overall shape of this, and then thinking about something like friendship, right?
Yes.
And then something like fellowship, which I want to look at too, about this difference between the word, and I got this from Dan, one of his walks on the country path, as he likes to puts them. We both do these like take these walks and we just point the camera out. You can't see our face and we just think and walk, right? And he's really great at that. But he started it off talking about actually the last conversation posted on the Self that you guys are doing. Right. And he it's this really interesting dialogue that he had, and I never thought about this difference. That he said the difference between, I think, friendship and fellowship, right? That there's, and in the way he saw it was that there's something about fellowship that seems to be more constituting of people, right? Whereas friendship has another element to it, right? Of where it's a little bit more, you can have kind of opponent processing. There's something more going on there. But then there's fellowship, which you step into fellowship, and there's this quality where fellowship is creative of the people in this very kind of primordial way. And so I'm just kind of, and
Yeah.
I'm just noting like, oh yeah, and fellowship is what garners these conversations of like the heart of, it seems like the heart of listening to reason and responding to it, right? Exemplified in the Platonic
Yeah.
dialogues.
Yeah.
What's inherent in it and is held through it is fellowship, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
deepened.
So yeah, I've had some conversations with Chris and Andrew Sweeney about the distinction between friendship and fellowship.
Yeah.
Because I was proposing that, yeah, that fellowship is the proper locus for dialogos. I mean, obviously friends can do it,
Yeah.
but you don't. I mean, because what I was trying to get was and you know this from circling,
Yeah.
that people report this sudden, profound intimacy that is not the acquired intimacy of friendship.
Yeah.
Right? Where I'm like, friendship is an intimacy that you earn by deeply committing to people's longitudinal development, right? Where like I was trying to get at this sense of people having a deep intimacy that emerges in, like when within fellow, like within circling, or when people go to church, they go to church and they see each other once an hour or two a week, and yet they get this bond that's formed,
Yeah.
which is not the same as the bond of friendship. And you know, and so the model I was using for friendship was Paul, St. Paul's notion of the body of Christ, right? So that what we're doing in fellowship is maybe using the language we had here, right? What we're doing in fellowship is we are trying to build good people leading good lives within that fractal framework that is disclosed at the depth of the right?
Yeah.
Right. Whereas in friendship, what we're doing is I would propose, we're moving off of personhood within a community of persons.
Yeah.
That's why it's inherently agapic fellowship. We're moving into the crafting of the self. Friendship is about mutually shared selfing, whereas I would say that fellowship is about mutually crafted personhood.
Right.
And those aren't the same thing. They interpenetrate and they overlap, but so every fellowship needs friendships.
Yeah.
And all friendships need to be situated within fellowships,
right.
But they're not identical, because just like I think personhood and selfhood aren't identical. But when you're committing to someone as a friend, you're committing to their project of selfing. Whereas if you're in fellowship, what we're doing is we're committing to the project of the fractal realization of personhood within reality. That's how I would propose it to you, at least.
Wow. I'm glad we recorded that. Because in writing this looking at in writing this paper I'm writing on skole, right? And this kind of really realizing that you can't understand the ancient understanding of skole. Essentially, it's the apex of ends and means. It's like where the good and the means to the good are the same, right? There is no process going on. It's considered the pinnacle of, I don't know, realization of being. And so, like Socrates said, like, I think you guys at the end, of course, he's being Socrates, like, look, I don't think you should kill me. I think you should pay me. So I could spend more time in skole having like philosophical dialogues, right? And Socrates, and Aristotle said that like theoria happens in skole, right? This kind of but it's interesting, you can't, and it's skole is translated and I think lost into leisure. It's still right?
Yeah.
It's often translated into leisure or idleness.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's Pfeiffer who's tried to bring back the notion of leisure in the Greek sense. Because leisure used to be considered at least a ground for virtue.
Yeah.
The problem with leisure is we have confused it with the time away from work in which we can recover so that we can work again.
Totally.
Right.
But even there, what's interesting about it is like that underlies almost all economics, right?
Yes.
And like
Yes.
if I mean, if anything, capitalism, we're like, it's all economics, right? So even
But it
there, it's
underlies,
central, right?
yeah, but it underlies what we've been saying earlier with
Yeah,
Schindler, that the productivity of reason has to be in something that it produces that has an economic value,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
which is right. Whereas we should be thinking that reason properly understood is the epitome of leisure,
yeah,
where leisure properly understood is not the absence of work. We shouldn't understand it privatively. We should understand it providentially. It is where we are providing for our personhood. I mean, and our right relationship to reality.
mm,
And, I'm willing to sacrifice quite a bit of my
mm,
economic
yep,
lifestyle so
yep,
that I can come into a good life.
yeah,
And most people would do that too.
yeah,
If they properly understood, at least this is Plato's argument, and I
yeah,
think there's empirical research to back it up. Most people would sacrifice their economic lifestyle if they were convinced that it would lead them to a good life.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, and it's interesting
So
because in trying to write about this, I'm realizing like the reason why you can't translate it, right, is because it it presupposes a different way of being in time itself, right? It's a
but
it's a different temporality that I think that the in some senses is virtually lost, right? But
yeah,
it
Han
still
talks
it
about
still
it in this
peaks out in
time.
some of our phrases, right? When we say it's like the
Yeah,
right time, or
yeah,
like
yeah.
meaning and time
Paradox.
being so spoken together, right?
Yeah, and so that's what Han talks about in The Scent of Time.
Yeah.
He talks about the ability to linger. We've lost
Yeah.
the ability to linger.
Yes.
Um, I've been trying to get back that notion with the notion of serious play, like when we're seriously playing music,
Yeah. There you go.
right? That notion, and
Yeah.
and so that's a great connection you've made, because there's a sense in which listen to the voice of reason means being able to listen to the musicality of being, which means being able to seriously play music and
Right.
listen within serious play
Yeah.
to that musicality.
Yeah.
And if you can't hear that, I mean, and of course we had the mythological representation of that in being able to hear the music of the spheres, right?
Yeah.
If people can't hear that, if they're deafened to it, then there is no way that reason qua reason can make an appeal
Mm,
to them. It can't call to them because they can't hear it. But
right.
but
Right.
but I mean, remember what we said earlier about virtues. They All of us must have some primordial beginning of reason, or else we could never ever come to
Yes.
appreciate it. Never ever learn it.
Yes.
So although people can be deafened to it, and maybe that's part of what's at the heart of the meaning crisis, it doesn't mean we have to fall into despair. It doesn't mean they're forever lost.
No. No.
I
No.
have to, I have to go soon, my friend. I have to
This
go
is
soon. I haven't.
so good.
Yeah.
So speaking of friendship, I just had this moment of just feeling the innate bond and affinity that we've developed, John, and I just feel so grateful
Yeah.
for
Me
my
too.
friendship with you. Yeah.
So, Guy, if you save this and if you edit out some of the blinks,
Yeah.
I'd appreciate having a copy.
Yeah.
I'd like to put this up on my channel at some point, because
So
I want
rich.
to. Yeah, it's so rich, and the deep connections between listening to reason, dialogos, realization,
Yeah.
serious play, all of that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really want to.
Okay.
I just want to, even if I just want to also just have it for my own sake. There's a lot in here that was emergent, genuine
Yeah.
dialogos,
Yeah. Yeah.
genuinely emergent. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. We started talking about our anxious attachment styles, and this is where we ended up.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, yeah. There's a deep
And,
connection
and
there.
and I think that can see that's what I'm talking about is like this is the way that I would imagine where you end up when you listen to reason, because like we can start talking about the most ordinary situations of our lives, and with a certain kind of listening you can hear, and it could start to speak to you, and then you can start to respond to it, and then it opens up and we end up in this whole world that exemplifies all the things that we're talking about. Yeah, this
Yeah,
is,
that's Spinoza's Scientia Intuitiva. But it's
there you
also
go.
Blake's mystical vision to see the world in a grain of sand.
Yeah,
It's the two. You
yeah,
see, and we were exemplifying what my question is. How do we discourse and how do we dialogue and how do we propose propositions to each other,
right, right.
right? And clarify our concepts such that we get to the same place that we can get in the mystical vision.
Yeah,
Because that, to me, to get to the place where we appreciate the really real as what was always calling us in reason, that to
yeah.
me is to listen to reason. Anyways, I gotta go. I gotta go.
So
I gotta go.
good.
We'll
Much
just keep
love.
talking.
Okay,
Much
cool.
love to you.
This is great. This is
Take care.
great pre-course talk too. Bye.
Yeah, very much. Very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.